Hi everyone. Greetings from Turkey. This is week 8, and this is the first class of week 8. I'm recording this video clip to substitute our in-person class on Tuesday. I'm recording that on late Monday. You know why I am not in the United States in Boise. You know the reason for myself being in Turkey. Again, I apologize for this situation, and I appreciate your understanding. Okay, let me share my screen so you can see my lecture slides as always, and then we can go from there. Okay, I think you can see my slides. So this will be our agenda for today. Today we will continue to talk about import substitution industrialization, an industrialization strategy that was recommended recommended to the developing countries by Bretton Woods system, and this industrialization strategy was supported by the institutions of second globalization, as you can remember. We talked about that. I will quickly review the meaning of ISI at the beginning of our class, and then we will elaborate our discussion about why ISI was not against globalization. And on the contrary, ISI was a part of Bretton Woods system, and it was supporting globalization. It was making some dimensions of globalization stronger. So we began to talk about that, and we will elaborate this discussion today. And I will also try to show you today why the global values, why having a global community, as we defined in the very beginning of this semester, is important for the success of ISI. And there are some other industrialization strategies that are very popular today. Um, we will show they are actually maybe an advanced version of the global division of labor initiated by ISI. And today, still, we need these global values for the success of globalization. So I think this discussion is important because it will show us once again that globalization is not a technical problem, or it is not a technical issue, right? So there is also a sociology behind globalization. To have a successful economic globalization, even in technical terms, we need to have a global community. We need to foster and protect some global values that are vital for globalization. So the cultural dimension is important for economic dimension of globalization. I will try to show you that with our discussion today. Okay, so this was what we were talking about, right? We said ISI was not mercantilist and not against globalization. So a very quick summary about a very quick summary of our discussion in the last class. As you can remember, we talked about dependency theory, right? Dependency theory has a lot of recommendations, suggestions, or recipes, right? One among them was very important, and it has a different importance for second globalization. This was ISI once again, right? ISI was supported and recommended by the Bretton Woods system to the developing countries. You know, intuitively, after talking about the technical details of ISI, we can conclude like ISI should be against globalization, right? Because it includes protection, right? As an industrialization strategy, it wants to decrease the import of the developing world, right? So, you know, we said there are two ways to industrialize for a developing country. You can try to create, build, and make an exporting sector industry stronger, right? Obviously, this should be good for globalization, right? Because if you produce something for global markets, this can increase the international trade. No need to argue. But industrialization through ISI is different, right? Here you want to substitute for your for your imports, right? So this should decrease the international trade. You can think in this way, but as we explained, this was not the case with globalization, right? Sorry, this was not the case with ISI. ISI didn't decrease the international trade, but it only changed the direction of international trade, right? Under ISI, okay, final goods were not imported anymore, but to produce these final goods, some intermediate goods should be supported from other countries and especially from developed countries. So that's why actually after seeing ISI embraced by some developing countries after Second World War, we observed that there was an increase in the international trade volume, right? But in a different way. And secondly, we said ISI was also good for another dimension of economic globalization. This was the international investments, right? ISI included protectionism, and the protected domestic good created a viable and good investment opportunity for the capital in the developed countries, right? So after ISI, we observed an increase in the foreign direct investment in different developing countries. Okay, so we talked about that, as you can remember, and now we can provide another argument, another supporting argument um, for the same point, right? So ISI was not mercantilist, it was not against globalization, and it was good both for developing and developed countries. Um, and I will explain that point with an important theory. And this will be the flying geese model. Okay. Um, so developing countries, ISI was good because it provided the first industrial experience, right? And I will explain that with the flying geese model. For the developed countries, it was also good because it freed up some of their resources for some more valuable production. Okay. Now, I will explain the flying geese model with a simple example. Now think about this step one, described by flying geese model. Step one describes the period immediately observed after the Industrial Revolution. You know, in the first stages of Industrial Revolution, we had only one country or one group of country as uh, an industrialized country, right? This was UK or mainly the Western European countries. And at the beginning of Industrial Revolution, we had not many like varieties of industrial goods, right? Textile production was very important at the beginning of Industrial Revolution. And UK and some other Western European countries were mainly textile producers. What about the other countries? For example, country B and country C, they were still in the middle of feudalism, right? And feudalism, this economic system is based on agricultural production, as you can remember. So this was the picture we could see immediately after Industrial Revolution. There was one country or a group of countries as textile producers, and the other countries were agricultural producers. But you know, as the Industrial Revolution advanced, we had some other industrial goods that are more complicated and that could bring more value or more revenue to the first group of industrialized countries, right? So as an example, think of radio. Okay, for sure we could pick some other industrial goods as an example for step two, but I picked randomly radio. Radio is a more value added industrial good compared to textile, right? And that's why country A can have more willingness to produce radio. Country A or this first group of industrialized countries can prefer to dedicate their resources mainly to the production of radio, right? Because it could bring more value, more revenue for country A. But you know, country A still needs some textile at home. But this less value added production now should be produced by some other countries, right? So country A, or the first group of industrialized countries, now need some other countries as textile producers and textile exporters, right? So now, let's say country B, or the second group of industrialized countries, are ready to experience their own industrial revolution, and now they are ready to undertake the responsibility of textile production. Okay, so now, if this is the case, textile production can go to country B. In other words, like geese, it can migrate, fly to the second group of countries. And in this way, country A can focus on radio production, right? Now they freed up their resources to produce textile. Okay, good. What about country C? They are still a feudal economy, right? Okay, now let's define another step, step 3. Now industrialization advanced more, and now we have more complicated industrial goods like TV sets, right? Okay, so now TV sets is more preferable, more complicated, and more desirable, right? It promises more opportunities for gaining more income, more revenue, or whatever. So country A now would like to um, use its resources for TV sets production, not primarily for radio or not primarily for textile, right? So now country B has some experience in industrial good production, right? In the previous step, they were able to produce textiles successfully. So now they are ready to take the responsibility of producing a more complicated good, which is radio. So now radio production flew from country A to country B. But to experience its own step 2, country B needs also free its resources up, right? So that's why they need another country or another group of country as textile producers, right? So now textile production um, went from country B to country C. So this is basically the flying geese model, right? As we have more complicated industrial goods available, right? Some production flies to the other places. So there is a change of the location of the production. Okay, for sure we could define step 4, step 5, right? And everything is much more complicated for sure, because definitely there is some radio and textile production in country A, but this is the simplified version of what we experienced after having the second globalization, right? So here the thing is, um, Flying Keys model describes what we experienced after Bretton Woods system, after Second World War, right? In the Flying Geese model, we see some changes in the location of the production, and the discussion is mainly about final goods. You can see that, right? But today the picture is much more complicated, and a discussion on ISI indicates that fact, right? It is not only about performing um, the production of final good, but today, what we observe is even some steps of the whole production process can go to the other countries, right? Okay. Now think about this picture and this question. I took this picture from my Principles of Microeconomics textbook. So here we see a very complicated industrial good, which is an airplane, right? This is Dreamliner produced by Boeing, right? Okay. So the question is, who makes the Dreamliner, right? If we have another complicated industrial good in the United States, for example, will the production of Dreamliner simply fly to country B or country C? Is that the logic of the global division of labor right now? Actually, this is not the case, right? Actually, the Dreamliner is not made by country A, country B, or by the United States anymore, right? We divide the production of Boeing of Dreamliner into a lot of steps, right? And the production of some parts already flew to the other countries, right? Okay, so you can see the picture here, right? We have a final good, but for example, landing gear is produced in the UK, engine is produced in the UK, cargo doors are produced by Sweden, right? There is a company in Australia producing particular components of Dreamliner. So the picture is much more complicated, right? Okay, so let's do a few remarks on ISI, and we can also ask some questions, okay? The first thing is, I think this already became obvious. ISI created a new global division of labor, right? For the first time, we have a division of labor among many countries, and more importantly, we have a division of labor between developed and developing world for industrial production, right? So this is not the first time that we have a division of labor between developed and developing countries, right? First, globalization included a division of labor. Western countries delegated the production of agriculture, right? Remember Adam Smith's and David Ricardo's classical international trade theories, right? The developing countries should be agricultural producers because they can do that better, right? But in the during second globalization, or after World War II, now there is a division of labor about industrial production, right? And Flying Geese model explains this. With ISI, right, beginning 60s and 70s, some parts of the industrial goods are were produced by some other countries, right? So Flying Geese model is about final goods, but ISI provides kind of framework that includes a much more complicated picture than the Flying Geese model, right? Okay, final goods are produced by some countries, but not everything about this final good is produced by a country anymore, right? There is a division of labor to produce a single product. Today, the situation is much more complicated, okay? To understand today's division of labor, we should talk about two additional concepts. These are outsourcing and offshoring, okay? In our next module, I will try to explain the meaning of these two concepts, and I will try to explain their importance. And this will be about the second item of our agenda, okay? Why a global culture, why having a global community is important to um, sustain this intense level of global division of labor. By the way, let me finish this module with a quotation from Adam Smith. He said the level of division of labor is dependent on the scale of trade, right? So division of labor and international trade are never independent from each other, right? If you would like to have an industrial division of labor, right, is needed by ISI, then you should have a good level of commercial network at the global scale, right? Because otherwise, um, having a division of labor should be too risky, right? If you don't produce some particular parts of Dreamliner, as we saw here, right, you should be sure that you can get these parts from international markets, right? If you can't be sure about the sustainability of the commercial trade, then you can't delegate the production of these parts to the other countries. Okay, I will try to explain that more in our next module. Okay.